we have this belief that money is evil, right? They teach it to us in school. They say it in the church, on movies, TV, right? Money's evil. Money's the root of all evil, right? And one of the most useful mindset shifts for me has been the realization that money is a tool, right? And just like a hammer, you can use a hammer to hit people over the head. That's a bad way to use a hammer. Or you can use it to build a house. It's a great way to use a hammer. So money's a tool. Money's not evil. And money is actually a transfer of energy. What's up, Disrupt Nation? My name's Tony Delgado, and you are watching Entrepreneur Unleashed.
Welcome back to another episode. My name is Edward Collins. I'm your host for Entrepreneur Unleashed. And as you know, if you've been following me at any length, I believe that the best way to shortcut your journey of success is to learn vicariously from others who have been through what you're going through now and made it through to the other side. I'm joined in the studio today by Tony Delgado. We're going to be getting into a lot of really good stuff, and I don't want to delay it any further. Let's just get started. Tony, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, man.
So I know a lot about you. We're friends, but the audience may not. So would you mind just telling us maybe like a 90-second version of who you are and what you're doing right now?
So, sure. My name's Tony Delgado. I'm the CEO and founder of Disrupt. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of Latino Wall Street, a mission to create financial literacy in the Latin community and have an impact on the 400 million Latinos all around the world. Wow. That sounds fancy.
It sounds super fancy. I love it. Okay.
But I grew up super humble, grew up on Section 8. Father wasn't around, single mother. Okay. And don't want to necessarily say that I grew up poor, but I definitely grew up around poverty.
Okay.
So I realized from a really young age that whatever was being taught in the school system about money wasn't the truth. I didn't know what the truth was, but I knew that the truth was not what they were really being taught there, right? And in 5th grade, we had a teacher who was teaching math and decided to introduce the stock market into his curriculum.
In 5th grade?
In 5th grade.
Wow.
And he was telling us to buy Amazon when the shares were under $1.
Oh, my goodness.
At that point.
Oh, God, if only. If only, right? Oh, man. Well, wow.
Yeah. So, but what he was doing was very disruptive. What he was doing was not on the curriculum. It wasn't on the menu. So I learned from a really young age that they weren't going to teach us about money in school. I remember doing a lot of simple math and figuring out that, like, hey, how much does a teacher make? Like, that was like my first question.
In 5th grade you were thinking this?
Yeah, like 3rd grade, something maybe, like 6th grade. Yeah, around there. Like before middle school, I was asking, how much are the teachers making? Okay. Right? And then doing the mathematics and saying, okay, how can I become a millionaire, right? And then so that was something that I fixated on when I was really young too. I was like, how can I become a millionaire? And so I was like, okay, well, $1 million is this much, right? And I was really good at math. And there's 365 days a year. So then I remember the first number that I had came up with is like, that's about $3,000 a day.
Yes.
So I was like, I have to make $3,000. How do I make $3,000 a day? Because if I do that, then I can't
believe you did that at such a young age.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was sort of my goal before I went into high school, was how do I make $3,000 a day? So I started all these different types of crazy businesses. I had a lemonade stand. I had a car wash. Okay. I would host Super Bowl parties and sell tickets to my friends. So everybody else is having free birthday parties. I was like, no, there's a cover charge.
I love this.
And so I was always really fascinated and infatuated with entrepreneurship. And that led me down a path of many different activities, both legal and illegal entrepreneurship. So I did all sorts of weird, crazy stuff. Okay. But I was really blessed because I was one of the first people in my community to have access to the internet. Okay. Right. So at that time, we're talking about the 90s. Internet's kind of a new thing.
Yeah, the whole dial-up thing.
Yeah, the dial-up thing. It's very fringe, right? People are not, it's like for nerds and weird people, right? Everybody's not on the internet. And we had the president, Bill Clinton and Al Gore, come to our school at various times throughout my youth. And one of the initiatives they did was they gave everyone computers, right? But I was actually really lucky that I didn't need the computer because I already had one. My mother was a computer programmer. Oh, okay. So I had an MS-DOS computer when I was in the 2nd grade, and I learned the command line. So I was like using a computer with no mouse, no keyboard, definitely no TikTok, no touch screen, right? I'm like typing in commands. And so I had the access to the internet at a really young age. And then I started selling stuff on like eBay and Amazon. So that was my first kind of touch into entrepreneurship, was like just selling stuff online.
Wow. Well, actually, your touch was probably like lemonade stand, car wash, and all that sort of stuff too. But when we're talking about like the digital age, quote unquote, in the 90s, you jumped right in with just understanding understanding the fact that if you wanted something, you had to go out and get it. Yeah. Right. And then figuring out how to add value to whoever it was, if it's a product or a service or whatever it was you were doing. That's amazing you did that at such a young age. I think that's probably why we're friends, because I have a very similar background. So
yeah, it's entrepreneurship in your DNA, right?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
When you look at that experience, you touched on something I can't let us like gloss over, like the whole not necessarily kosher environment with regard to what you were doing when you were a youth. Did that derail you at all, or just inspire you? Like, tell me about what, like, the challenges that you were engaged in when you were a kid.
Okay, so like when I grew up, there was no Gary V.
Right.
There was no Instagram and TikTok.
Definitely
Entrepreneurship wasn't even a word, basically. Yeah. And so who do we look up to, right? Mm-hmm. We looked up to rappers and music artists and all these things. So when you turn on the media, well, what do you see?
MTV at that time.
Yeah, MTV and BET and all that stuff. You see rappers talking about selling drugs and robbing people and killing people and doing all these crazy sorts of things. And I grew up in the inner city, and it's kind of interesting. My life has a lot of different.
Where did you grow up again?
Buckets. So I grew up right outside of Manhattan in New Jersey.
Okay.
West New York, Newark, Union City, all these areas that are right outside of Manhattan. And since I was a kid, I used to go to Manhattan. So I would take the PATH train to New York, and I'm, not even in high school yet, and I'm hanging out in New York, right? And so in New York, there's a big culture of drugs. There's a big culture of all sorts of crazy things that we got into as young people. And like I said, like we were hosting parties and basically created like our own version of a speakeasy at some point.
Okay.
And definitely like selling marijuana in high school and all sorts of like really crazy things that we did when we were young. And then like my life had all these different chapters, right? Okay. So if I was going to write a story about my life, it would have to be different books and different movies, because I had a lot of different phases, and in every single phase of my life, I was willing to reinvent myself and give up whatever identity I had initially created. Right. So like I mentioned, like in my early youth, I grew up in the inner city, and then around the time of high school, I moved to the suburbs.
Okay.
So I went from being like one of the richest kids or the most privileged kids in the inner city to one of the brokest kids in the suburbs. Yeah. Right. And every single time that I would make these different jumps, right, I would essentially have to reinvent myself. By the time I was graduating from high school, I had gone to approximately 12 different schools. It was basically like every other year.
Oh my goodness.
I was either getting kicked out of a school or moving, or getting into a private school, getting kicked out, going back to public school, getting selected to go to the honors program of the public school, then getting kicked out of the honors program of the public school. So I was like bouncing around a lot. Wow. And so in each one of those different chapters of my life, I had to reinvent myself, right? And, crime and doing things that were illegal and breaking the rules, that was a normal part of everyday life. Like I had friends that were in gangs. I had friends that were worse than me. Like whatever I was doing was pretty bad, but like whatever they were doing were 10 times bad. And then I started to learn that just by knowing these people, just by being associated with them, I could get into a lot of trouble. One of the first times that I got arrested, I was a teenager, and we were just walking around the neighborhood. But since some of the people I was with had just committed a crime, the
Guilty
cops come and they lock everybody up. We were all getting locked up. And so eventually those charges were dropped. But
it's still not a great experience.
Time after time, we're getting in trouble for a lot of it was for like marijuana and like petty things, trespassing, all sorts of like weird, crazy things. But I learned that being guilty by association was a huge thing. And so I learned that, okay, I need to change my circle. I need to find a different inner circle to be surrounded by, because if I don't change the people around my environment, well, then they're gonna pull me down, right? So when I was a teenager, I started out like selling loose cigarettes. Then I sold marijuana for a little while, and then I kept getting in trouble. And I remember seeing all the bills pile up for like the lawyers and the bail and all this stuff. And then I was simultaneously running these businesses online. And I was like, these businesses online are way more profitable. I'm making way more money, and I don't have to look over my shoulder. Right. So I made a decision really early on that I had to draw a line and a clear distinction. And I decided to embrace more legitimate forms of entrepreneurship, not really out of an ethical thing. It's so funny because I was quasi-political, and I was doing all this research into the way the money system worked, the legality around marijuana, how it was became criminalized, all these things. And I had sort of a self-righteous indignation that I thought, weed shouldn't be legal. So since it shouldn't be legal, then I'm just going to sell it anyway and break the law, right? And it took me becoming an adult to realize that just because something should be illegal, if it is illegal, I need to respect the laws of the land, and wait for history to catch up. If we look now, weed's been legalized in New Jersey and a bunch of other states, but I was 10 years or 20 years ahead of that curve, right? But I did dissertations. I was dropping essays in high school and college about why weed should be legalized, why the media is controlled by a few handful of organizations, and how there's puppets pulling the puppet strings. Like I was, and maybe the essay might have been on like George Washington, and then I drop a dissertation on Clear Channel or something, or BlackRock. But so I from an early age, I had access to the internet. Everybody didn't. Right. And from an early age, I was always questioning things. So I was always raising my hand and saying, the teacher says something. I was like, hey, listen. I looked up on Google or maybe Yahoo or Excite back then, and they said something else. So I was always questioning authority. But as I matured, I learned that, hey, just because things aren't the way they should, I still need to respect the law of the land. Right. If not, I'm going to get smacked.
There's consequences. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You could recognize that even though you have had a different opinion as to what should or shouldn't be allowed, because it wasn't, you didn't want to deal with the consequences, so you made a choice that turned out financially even better. But
so like if you wanted to have a marijuana business, right, you can move to California or Colorado where it's legal. Go move there or Amsterdam back then, right? Because there wasn't that many places. But go move to a place where it's legal and do the business there. Exactly. But if you're going to operate,
the risk's not worth it.
Yeah, it's not worth it. And they're going to make sure it's not worth it.
Exactly. Now, what I find so interesting, though, is that you have the ability, again, at such a young age, to be willing to just abandon who you were in the moment to become who you want it to be. Like you had the ability to say, this was my life before, but I don't want that life anymore. And I just literally leave it behind, do something different. Not a lot of people have that skill set, or at least they struggle with it, right? Like if you look at individuals who are looking to hit milestones of success, I think you touched on it a bit. Like if you're surrounding yourself with people who aren't there, or not in that mindset, they sort of pull you down, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you were willing to like break free of that. Was there anything that inspired you to do that, or was that just innate?
Well, I mean, I think just getting kicked out of so many schools, maybe it was a habit of just reinventing myself because I was getting shipped around from school to school. Okay. But definitely my mother and my upbringing, that she always laughed. She's like, oh, I wonder where you got that rebellious spirit from, because she was very rebellious from the 60s, that era of, hippie and protesting and all that fun, crazy stuff. But I knew that I always wanted more. I watched my mother struggle. I watched my family struggle. And again, like we were by no means poor, but we were always just sort of getting by. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I was destined for greatness. I knew that I was destined for more. I knew that I had so much more to give. Mm-hmm. So at each level of my life, whether it was going from one of my first jobs was working at McDonald's, right? I remember I lied on the job application, and you had to be 16 to work there, and I lied and changed my date of birth. I was only 15, right? And I remember just saving up like just enough money that I needed to then go and start a business, right? And then leaving. I worked there for about a month, and I was like, okay, I have enough money now. I'm gonna stop doing this. But then that was always my my measuring stick in the beginning. Was, okay, if I work at McDonald's, or I also worked like factory jobs too when I was younger, it's like they're going to pay me $5 an hour. So if I can learn how to make $5 an hour without them, then I'm in a good spot, right? And then the $30,000 a year mark became another benchmark when I was really young. It's like, okay, the schools, if I go to college and I get a degree and I go become a teacher, I'm going to make $30,000 to $40,000 a year. So if I can learn to make $30,000 or $40,000 a month, well then
that's way better.
That's way better, right? And I was willing to let go of the habits and the things that at that point were comfortable. And then I think I also had the benefit of hanging out with a lot of people older than me. I was always bigger and just size-wise, and then also a little bit more mature. So like I took a senior girl to the prom when I was in 8th grade or freshman year, something crazy like that. Yeah. Okay. And so I was always hanging out with the older kids. And so I could see in real time where my life would end up if I continued down that path, right? So I had friends who committed suicide. I had friends that killed each other, and one kid shot the other one. One's doing 18 years, and the other one's not here anymore, and his mother had to grab him from the doorstep, right? So I was able to see in real time where my life was going to end up if I continued down that path. So I knew that I had to switch paths, or I was going to get stuck there. So I moved out of my mom's house at an early age, and I started a store. That was one of the first businesses that I started. I started a retail clothing store, and then I took a lot of the products that I was selling online and I put them into this store. And at that point, I was like, "Oh, you need a store." It's kind of funny as an entrepreneur.
You did like a brick and mortar thing.
But I was like, "Yeah, I need to have a brick and mortar because that's a real business. I need to have a real business, right?" That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And then
if only we knew better.
Yeah, if only we knew better, right? But I was still doing things online, and at a certain point, I realized I was actually making more money from the online than the in-person, but I still wanted to have the in-person, I think for credibility or something. And then I had...
At what age was that? When you...
Probably about 21.
21.
Yeah. So I got kicked out of college. I went to college, and the same thing. I was bringing friends. I was bringing the friends from my old neighborhood, right, onto the campus, bringing them to the parties. They're getting in trouble. They're starting fights and starting problems. And then I'm getting in trouble because I brought them on campus. Right. So I ended up getting kicked out of college because of that. And I didn't want to tell my mom. I was scared. I was so scared to tell her. I didn't want to let her down. Right. And I moved in with a friend. I started renting a room, paying half the rent, and selling stuff on eBay and Amazon. So for like a year, she didn't know. She thinks I'm in college, and I'm selling stuff out of eBay and Amazon in my friend's house, right? And renting a room from them. Then eventually, obviously, I had to tell her. But yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I always knew that whatever path that I was on wasn't the right path, and then I was never scared to course correct. So my whole life I've just been course correcting. And then I taught myself to code. Oh my gosh. Yeah, because back then you had to. If you want to do stuff on the internet,
you had to do it yourself.
You had to do it yourself. There was no Shopify, like these things didn't exist. So I didn't teach myself to code because I wanted to be a coder. Right. I just taught myself out of necessity. The same thing with entrepreneurship, right? I didn't know what entrepreneurship was. Right. There was no Google headquarters on the East Coast. You're from the East Coast, right? You're from Jersey. So there was no Silicon Valley on that side. All the cool activity with startup and tech, that all happened in California. And then in 2015, I went to a conference in Silicon Valley. And I remember the tickets were like $1,000. At that point, I thought that was like more money than God to go to a 2-day event. And plus the hotel and the airfare and all those things. So I went, and my whole mind opened up because I get out of the plane and I see billboards for WordPress. And I was like, WordPress buys billboards? What the hell is going on? And Slack and all these tech companies are like everywhere. And it really opened my mind to what was possible. And I met people that worked in Microsoft and Amazon and all these big companies. And it really opened my mind. And then every single time that I took a jump and I invested in myself, it gave me more and more tools. The next year, I paid $10,000 to go to a coding boot camp, right? And that was one of the best investments of my life, not necessarily because I learned how to code, because I already knew how to code, right? But it gave me all of these experiences. I networked with everyone. I was at the top of the class. At the end of the class, they offered me a job to be an instructor. Wow. And everyone that I met there didn't know how to code. Like, that's why they joined. I had been coding for 10 years, but I knew I wanted to take my career and my life to the next level. So I invested $10,000 into this program. And then I started going to hackathons, winning hackathons. We won all these awards for like coding and building these apps and prototyping stuff. And again, it was opening up my mind to the next level of, hey, what's next? What's next? What's next? And then throughout the course of all these years, I was moving to different cities wherever the opportunity was, whether it was a job or whether it was a business. I would move to different cities where people didn't know me, right? So I didn't stay in the city where I went to high school. I didn't stay in the city where I grew up. I was always going to different places wherever the opportunity was. And then I ended up working with an entrepreneur named Gerard Adams. At that point in his life, he had just sold his company for $50 million. And he was on the brink of taking that money and trying to give back to the entrepreneurial community. And he started a tech accelerator where we were basically investing like as angel investors into small minority-owned businesses in the community. So I came on board as a CTO, and I always joke and I say I wasn't the CTO of one business, I was the CTO of many. Because all these companies are coming in, they're like, what do we do? How do we code it? How do we build it? That was a really fun experience. And again, I learned a lot. And to circle back to my childhood, when I was really young, I read a Entrepreneur magazine article about an African-American multimillionaire. And at that time, that was like a big deal. They had him on the cover, and they're like, this guy, look at him. He's amazing. He's making all this money. And so I read the article, and what he had done is he worked in Taco Bell as a manager for 15 years, learned everything about the food service business, and then applied that and started a chicken franchise all throughout Texas and has all these locations all throughout Texas. Wow. And so the main takeaway from that story was every single time he had a job, like for those 15 years in Taco Bell, it was an education. He wasn't just collecting a paycheck. He was saying, okay, I'm here. I'm in Taco Bell. What can I learn from this? Maybe he didn't have a plan, but what can I learn from being here? What can I take away from being in this situation? That in itself
is a plan. Like you're doing it with intent, right?
Yeah.
So many people show up to their 9 to 5 and they just show up to get the paycheck, not necessarily to learn and to improve themselves and to dedicate themselves to skills development, whatever it may be. Whether you have an end goal in mind or not, that day should be a goal, right?
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, you're going to spend the money.
Yeah.
Whatever small amount of money you're getting paid for a job, that's going to be spent. What's not going to go away is the experience of who you get to become while you're there.
Correct.
So every single experience that I've had, whether it's getting in trouble as a kid, whether it's working day laborer jobs, whether it was working in corporate in an IT environment, whether it was getting in trouble online for businesses I had online, getting cease and desist from people all around the internet. Every single time these things were happening, they were never happening to me. They were happening for me, right? Like Tony Robbins says. And I was thinking, okay, what can I learn from being in this situation? So like, for example, I had a job in corporate IT. Okay. We were, I was in my early 20s. We were climbing through corporate buildings and running Cat5 cable and running Wi-Fi cables and installing printers and cameras and all phone systems and all the things that make a business work, right? And so a lot of people would clock out from that job at 5 o'clock.
Right.
They would leave like 4:49. Exactly. They're like, boom, I'm out. And I used to stay sometimes all night working, learning, working with the owner and like learning from him as a sponge. So every single time that I've had an opportunity to work with someone, for someone, that opportunity is, hey, what can I learn from the situation? Who do I get to become?
Exactly. One of the things that there is a theme throughout what we've just talked about that I think is important for a lot of people to learn. You would invest in yourself all along the way, whether that was $1,000 to go to the first conference, whether it was $10,000 to go to the boot camp, whatever it was you were willing to invest, not just dollars, but also your time. And I think that is an interesting thing, because when I look at the individuals who've hit milestones of success, every one of them has invested in themselves. They've put effort and energy to put time in, and there is something remarkable. The people who actually they pay attention, right? You're paying to be there, but you're like, when you got off the plane, you're noticing this billboard, that billboard. You're absorbing everything, and that would not have happened if you weren't willing to invest in yourself. Do you recognize that amongst the peers that you hang out with now, like the business owners that you have access to? Like, is that a theme that you're witnessing as well?
Yeah, it's almost like you're going to the casino with your life, and you're going to put all your chips on the table.
Right.
And, when I went to the coding bootcamp, it was very similar. Not only did I invest the money, but I invested the time. And I remember at the time, I had a few close friends that we would go out on the weekends and go drinking and hanging out to the nightclubs and stuff like that. And I remember calling them and saying, hey, listen, I just invested $10,000 to this program. There's a class on Saturday that I can't miss, and they're going to give me a whole bunch of homework. So you can come and we can have coffee on a Sunday morning. But besides that, you're not going to see me for 6 months. I'm going to go learn whatever it is that I need to learn with this $10,000 program and get the most of it, right? And so I lost a lot of friends along the way. And it's so interesting because a lot of my friends and peers, they haven't evolved. They haven't changed who they are. And so I'm a different person, right? I'm unrecognizable from the person that I was 20 years ago. And when they interact with me as if I'm the person from 20 years ago. And I'm like, no, that guy's dead.
Yeah, he doesn't exist.
He doesn't exist. I can tell you stories about him, like I'm sharing some stories with you now. But when I wake up in the morning, that's not who I am. I don't even think about that stuff, right? Yeah. And so one of the things that I've seen is, like you said, in my peers, that maybe they haven't progressed for whatever reason. They're not willing to invest even $10 into a book and sitting there and reading it, right? You can get, you have Russell Brunson's books back there, all over the place, right? So Russell Brunson's books, you can spend $10 on a book and learn the skills to make millions and millions of dollars, but people won't read the books.
You and I witness it every single day. Like our network now is filled with people who do that. But again, I think we have a very similar background. Like I definitely can witness individuals that of my past that would spend their weekends escaping from the life they have rather than spend and invest their weekends to build the life they want, right? So you're working this 9-to-5 environment and you're constantly struggling. But the reality is all you have to do is a little bit more to change yourself, to learn some new skill set, to add value, because money follows value creation. If you go out into the universe and you create value for others, the money is the natural byproduct of that. And so few of us in this entire planet actually recognize that. And we're part of that 1% crazy, as Russell talks about. We're the 1% crazy who will do the things that most won't to live the life that most will never.
I love that.
When you look at where you are now, like, so we transitioned from challenging environment, but constantly improving. You opened up the store. You were then selling things online and bringing the things into a brick and mortar. You made a transition, right, from there. What was the next step? You're learning all this stuff. You're getting into corporate America. You're doing all these different types of jobs. How did you transition into where you are now? Like, what was that like?
So we started doing consulting.
Okay.
And so I've honestly been doing consulting since I was a little kid. And I used to just knock on local businesses' doors and like build websites for like $500. I just knock, hey, do you need a website? Like, I know how to do websites.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing consulting off and on throughout all of the course of my entire life. And actually the partnership with Gerard Adams, at Founders at the angel investing company, that started out as a consulting gig. I came to him and we were like, hey, like here's an invoice. Then it turned into a partnership and we got equity in the venture and it was good. We ended up working with all these crazy people, Gary Vee and Grant Cardone and all these badasses. But that started out as us being consultants and us working kind of like hired guns, right? Okay. But I knew that if I stayed a hired gun, there was a cap. I can get to 6 figures as a hired gun, right. But to get to 7 and 8, it's going to be really hard difficult to do that just doing consulting. So we started our entrepreneurial movement in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. At that time, I was working for Gerard. We were making all sorts of impact in Newark, New Jersey, working with entrepreneurs, minority-owned businesses, and then we were throwing these massive events. So like the biggest event that I did while we were together was at the Red Bull Arena in Jersey. Yeah. And we had Eric Thomas, E.T. the hip-hop preacher there, and it was great. Like hundreds of people, really kick-ass, badass event, all these cool speakers. So from there, and that's 2016. So in 2016, I kind of saw the blueprint for influencer creation. Because at that point in time,
were ahead of the game.
Yeah, Gary Vee was new.
Yeah, he just got out of the whole environment
of selling wine or whatever the hell. Yeah. So
his dad's store was right
up the street in Jersey. We're Jersey boys. Yeah, Gary Vee. I remember watching his early vlogs and I saw the Lincoln Tunnel and stuff. But yeah, so when Gary Vee was just coming out, Gerard had just sold his company. He has $50 million and he's like, I want to build a personal brand, basically. So before that, he doesn't really have a personal brand. So I witnessed and also helped him build his personal brand kind of in the early years. So I saw this blueprint of online influence and personal brands. And like Hormozi talks about this, right? Like you look at like Caitlyn Jenner or what's the daughter?
Paris Hilton, that one?
No. The Kardashian daughter.
Oh, Kim Kardashian.
Kim Kardashian, but the little sister. Oh, Kylie. There we go, Kylie. So Kylie, as an example, she launches a cosmetic line, becomes $1 billion brand. Rihanna, the same thing, launches a cosmetic line, becomes $1 billion brand. The Rock launches a tequila, becomes $1 billion brand. So Puff Daddy, right? Diddy launches Ciroc, becomes $1 billion brand. Jay-Z launches a champagne, becomes $1 billion brand. So, but why is that happening? Right. It's not happening because the liquor or the cosmetics are particular.
The attention they control.
Well, yeah, it's the brand, right? So at this advent where Gary Vee's implementing his brand, Tom Bilyeu came and spoke on our stage before he was doing anything. Wow. He had just sold his company. Just sold Quest, and he came and spoke on our brand, on our stage, and started building his brand. So I'm witnessing all these brands coming created, being created, and I knew that personal brands were the one hack that I didn't fully understand and I wasn't fully able to leverage at that point in time. And you know, the internet was really slow when I first got started, right? Like online video, like what we're doing now, it was hard to do that because it was really hard for video to get downloaded. Phones were really slow. Things were 3G, 2G. Yeah, like you were lucky if Wi-Fi even worked, right? And as the phone started getting faster, now we had Instagram stories. We had Instagram lives, Facebook lives, right? Zoom calls. All these technologies, we kind of take them for granted now. But just the internet being fast enough and the phones and the technology being fast enough to support video has now created this new era where people like Joe Rogan are getting $100 million contracts for a podcast, right? So I'm witnessing these things happening. And then when Hurricane Maria struck the island of Puerto Rico in 2017, I found a problem that was bigger than myself. So I went down to Puerto Rico to do humanitarian work. And then we started our entrepreneurial movement in Puerto Rico. And what I noticed was, you know, largest blackout in American history. We had 3 million people without food or clean drinking water or electricity, right? Really, really bad circumstances. But the people that got affected the most were the people with no money and no resources. If you had money, you get on a plane. Either you had JetBlue money or you had fuck you money, right? Either you could get on a plane and like go somewhere else, go to your family in Florida or New York and hang out until the coast was clear. Or you had so much money that, hey, I can rebuild my house, I can buy backup generators, I can fuel my home with solar panels or with other things. And it was really the people with no money and no resources that got hit the worst. And it occurred to me, we went down with a few entrepreneurs to do humanitarian work. We were giving out solar panel lights, food, water, supplies, and we weren't a big nonprofit. We're just a bunch of crazy entrepreneurs that got on a plane on JetBlue and wanted to do it,
with
right?
good intent.
And we're on the top of a mountain. We're in a province. It looked like we're in like the jungle of Brazil or something. We're in the middle of nowhere, and we're giving water to a family that, since their house is in the middle of nowhere, like they were the last to get turned back on, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden I get a FaceTime call, and I pick up the call, and it works. So even though we don't have electricity, even though we don't have running water, they have the same Wi-Fi, the same internet connection as me. So that's when it dawned on me that the access to information, it is the great equalizer, right? Yeah. I was going down there. I was still working. I was still making money. I was still servicing my clients. I was still running my business, right? And it was really the access to information. They had the Wi-Fi. They had the internet. They just didn't know how to use it to make money.
Wow. So that entrepreneurial journey then in PR, like what was the impetus of the company? Like, what was the goal of the company that you were building there?
So we took some inspiration from some of the great change makers of our lifetimes. So at that point, I was going to personal development seminars in New York City, and we were studying some of the big change makers. So we were studying Martin Luther King, we were studying Gandhi, and we were looking at these really great leaders. And what we noticed, and what we learned in the seminar that I attended, was that all of these people were not elected.
Right.
They were not chosen. They chose their mission, right? So nobody voted for Martin Luther King, right? Martin Luther King decided, I'm going to select the African-American community. Now they're my problem. They're my responsibility. Right. I take responsibility for them. Right. Gandhi, the same thing. He wasn't an elected leader. He took responsibility for India, right? Yes. And with India, it's 3 billion people with a B that live there. I looked at Puerto Rico, there's only 3 million people. So I was like, okay, I'm being a punk if I can't take responsibility for 3 million people on the island where my family comes from, right? So I decided to take responsibility for the 3 million people in Puerto Rico, and to move down there and then to start this entrepreneurial movement called Disrupt. So we started hosting events, seminars, and workshops in Puerto Rico, getting college kids, busing in college kids and giving them free access to the information, and then just selling tickets to everyone else from around the world. Okay. So we started hosting our entrepreneurial conferences down there, and then I met my wife. Okay. And then COVID happened maybe about a year after I met my wife. Okay. And when I met my wife, she is not from Puerto Rico. She's from Peru. And she was talking to Latin women online. Right? So she's talking to Latin women online. I'm talking to Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. And then when we came together, we created Latino Wall Street. Yes. And then my mission expanded from the 3 million people in Puerto Rico to the 400 million Latinos all around the world. Wow. And so we created our financial literacy movement called Latino Wall Street, and we are on a mission to create financial freedom for the 400 million Latinos around the world.
I love it. Let's dive into the financial literacy component, because I'm very passionate about that. I think that's one of the major things that we as a society have fallen short on, is teaching people just even the basic concepts.
How to write a check.
Exactly. So, like, how do you identify, for you and for the community you serve, how do you identify what is the most critical things for people to learn, and then how do you organize it for them to learn it?
So, I mean, if you don't have a plan, then you're basically planning to fail, right? That's what they all say. So the first thing that I think is important for people to realize is that you have to have a plan, right? Most people that I know that grow up, that I grew up with, they don't have a plan for their finances. They don't have a plan for their retirement.
They don't have a plan for anything.
Right. But definitely not their money, right? And they don't understand money. They don't understand how it works. When we show people that they can invest their money and have it grow, they're amazed. They're like, wow, what? I didn't know that this was even a thing.
Compound interest. Wow.
Yeah, seriously. So our educational programs, we start with planning, and then we also start with like Finance 101. So we have a program, Finance 101. We go through budget. We go through like all the kind of the basics that they probably should have taught you in school, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And then we teach a whole bunch of different investing and trading strategies. We bring in experts. So we have brought in some of the most influential people in the world. Now, a lot of those people, unfortunately, don't speak Spanish, right? We were talking about this off camera. So what we do is we'll bring on interpreters and do translations when we do bring on cool experts. But we also have a team of native Spanish speakers from around the world who bring this education. And then, the education looks different depending on where you are in the world, right? The platforms and the systems and the laws in the U.S. are different than they are internationally. So we have different experts depending on where people are, et cetera. But we run programs both online and in person. We were doing a lot of in-person stuff with both movements before COVID. When COVID happened, it was kind of a blessing in disguise because it brought everything online, and then it really expanded our reach. So since COVID, we were able to reach over 20 million people online through social media. Wow. And then out of that, we've had over 100,000 come through our curriculum on our platform.
So are you spending more time now on Latino Wall Street or more on Disrupt? Or is it really a marriage of those two entities?
It's a little bit of a marriage of those two. We do spend a lot of time on Latino Wall Street just because it's Spanish speaking, and that's kind of been the mission. So Disrupt actually turned into an online magazine kind of almost by accident. So this is a funny story. I've told it on some other podcasts, but basically Disrupt started out as a digital marketing agency. So I was just doing consulting. Like I said, I was like a hired gun. So that was my brand for a while, and it was just my hired gun consulting brand. And then I started, before I started the seminars, I started a blog, right? So every website has a blog. So I would feature my clients on my blog, right? That would be like the first step. Like a client works with me and like I do a write-up and kind of drop a press release on my blog, gives them a backlink, gives me a little SEO juice. So the blog started out as just my website. And then I had other friends who had clients that they wanted to get featured, right? And in the beginning, I was publishing the articles for them. But eventually I was like, listen, guys, I'm just going to give you contributor accounts and like you guys can submit the articles. So it went from that to now we have over 2,000 contributors.
Oh my goodness.
And the magazine gets like millions of views.
Oh my goodness.
And then we have like a little subscription model that's built in. So it generates all this passive income, and it's kind of like this its own little monster that kind of lives online. So if you've gotten a DM that you want to get in Disrupt magazine and New York Times and Forbes, like, those guys are probably my contributors, right? But yeah, so this magazine that started out as just my blog for my stuff, my articles, my clients, right? Kind of grown into its own cool thing.
Wow. Is that like? Do you have that organized as a separate company, or is that?
Yeah. So it's a separate company. Yeah, it's its own company. It's actually incorporated as a nonprofit in Puerto Rico. Yeah, so it's a nonprofit in Puerto Rico, and then we do seminars once a year. So once a year we'll do the big seminars, and then we'll do special master classes. Like I said, we'll bring in experts. We have the podcast, so we've interviewed Grant Cardone, we've interviewed Dean Graziosi and Les Brown and a bunch of really cool people in English. And then a lot of times we'll interview those people in English for the Disrupt platform, and we'll have some of that stuff translated and then distribute it to Latino Wall Street in Spanish.
Wow. I love this story. When you look at the next steps then for you, because you're spending so much time truly transforming people's lives, like what's next? Like, because you've already had a huge impact. Like, what do you see the next 2 to 5 years looking like for you?
Well, I mean, you mentioned it, we're transforming people's lives, and it's all comes back to the first conference that I went to, right? Like, if I didn't go to that conference, like, I don't know what the hell would happen with my life.
Right.
I met the founder of Twitch. He had just sold his company for $1 billion. And then he looks into the audience and he tells us, hey, all you guys that know how to code, when you get back to Ohio, New York, New Jersey, wherever you're from, I want you to go make some more money. Right? So it's like, if that guy didn't say that to me from the audience 10 years ago, wherever it was, I don't know where my life would be now. Right? So it's really definitely like that reincarnation of us trying to give back and do for others what was done for us. As far as the next few years, I mean, we're now growing into financial services and some more consulting and growing that part of the business. So I'm really excited for that. I think Latinos are a community that have not been spoken to enough.
Underserved dramatically.
So the fact that we're able to bridge that gap and not to throw shade on anyone else in our industry, but I think some of the people who have been speaking to them are probably doing so from a place that's a little bit more lifestyle focused and a little bit too much showing off for my tastes anyway. I've seen a lot of provocateurs in the Latin space. A lot of people, you see them online with the rented Lambo and selling based on lifestyle. So I'm really proud that we've built a brand that's really focused around education. Authentic and focused around education, and then bringing that education also into the school system. So that's another core belief of both companies, is that we want to be able to augment the existing education system. So not like disrupt the whole education, throw it out and throw away the key.
But supplement it in the right way.
How do we add workshops? How do we add new curriculums? How do we train teachers to kind of bring this up like my teacher did for me in 5th grade, right? And so I think that's how we kind of make inroads, is getting more integrated into the existing educational system so we can have a bigger impact.
Yeah, it's almost the double-edged sword, though, is going to the teachers and teaching them the financial literacy.
Yeah.
And they learn that maybe it's not the $30,000 to $40,000 a year job that's really going to make it for them. They go out and start their own business.
Start a side hustle, right? Yeah.
When you look at the things that have been most impactful to you then, what would you say is the thing, like by far, that's moved the needle for you, making it possible for you to make the decisions that you're making day in and day out? Like, what is it that really drives Tony?
I think the biggest thing for me has just been mentors and investing in myself, right? Like, so many people are hard-headed in this life.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, you're hard-headed, but you're broke, right? Like, if you don't have the results that you want, you need to be able to like give up your belief system and adopt a new one and just try it on. Just try it out. If it doesn't work, you can always let go of it and grab a new one. But people get so set in their ways. And myself included, but whenever I notice myself that I'm stuck in a cycle, I try to snap out of it and just get myself in front of a new mentor, a new podcast, read a new book, and being willing to change my belief system and not get stuck in the rut of mediocrity. And there's levels to mediocrity, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Like right now, for me, 7 figures is feeling fucking mediocre, and I'm like, okay, how are we getting a 9?
Trust me, 8 and 9 are so much better. Well, 9 not yet for me, but 8 definitely better.
Well, so with the financial services business, we're doing a partnership with someone to provide those services. So I went into their office and I was like, listen, I don't need to learn how to make millions. I'm already doing that. So please don't try to impress me with make millions. How do we make hundreds of millions? Like that's the conversation that I want to be having, gentlemen, because and so it kind of becomes like a hamster wheel in a way, because it's like you're making money just for the sake of making money. And that's why I think it's really important to make sure that you give back and that you have some sort of philanthropic part connected to your business. So we do a bunch of cool things. We've given out laptops to people in Puerto Rico that didn't have them, cell phones with unlimited cell phone service. We've partnered with Feeding America, Tony Robbins' nonprofit, to provide meals. So every single time that we do these big seminars now, we learned this from him. He does these big online seminars and he charges for tickets. And when people buy tickets, he donates some of that to feed people around the world. So now we're on a mission to feed 1 million people around the world. So I think that's probably the thing that continues to drive me, is like, how can I now give back? Like, all my basic needs are met. I have a great quality of life. And now it's like, how can I give back to the people in my team? How can I develop them? And how can I develop the future leaders? I used to have this desire to become a politician. And then I saw Donald Trump and all the crazy stuff that's happening in our political atmosphere. And I was like, wow, whatever I do, half the country's going to hate me.
Right, no matter
They're going to go after my family. I was like, I don't want to do that. But what if we empower and create the future leaders?
Exactly.
And have create extreme leadership and extreme integrity into the future leaders so that the next generation of politicians and community leaders have extreme integrity and are equipped with those skills. So that's when my light bulb switched and said, instead of thinking that I'm the Messiah and I'm going to change it all alone, not one person could change it all alone, but what if we create an impact that has ripple effects throughout our generations? I love that. So we think that our movement is at least one small drop into doing that. I
love it. When you look at then that being the driving factor for you and where you envision you going from here, what do you think the biggest challenge is for you to get there? Like what do you need to be able to break through in order to make that happen?
So it's so funny because when you turn on TikTok or Instagram, right, what do you see? You see the girl or the guy that's half naked and not saying too much, maybe just dancing to a song on TikTok. And that's the person that has all the views and all the attentions. And then even if you're successful talking about business or finance, those people have, 10% of the views if they're lucky and 10% of the attention. So a big part of our mission and our movement is to make entrepreneurship cool. Make business and financial literacy cool. Because up until now, a lot of those things have not been cool, right? People turn on the TV and they're like, well, that guy doesn't look like me. So I'm not even going to get into this stuff, right? So we've made a huge effort to make this stuff cool, to make it accessible. We've done that through a lot of influencer collaborations and partnerships. So we'll partner with people in the music industry. We had multiple Latin Grammy artists at our last event in Puerto Rico last year, our big annual conference where we bring people out. We'll do Instagram lives with people in the entertainment industry and sort of mainstream and kind of bring this stuff in and make it mainstream. And it's so interesting because the people that are in that industry, they're front row with a notebook, like, wait, how do I save money on taxes? How do I grow my business? How do I put money away for my kids, right? They're like front row and really into it. So we've done a lot of partnerships and things of that nature to try to just get the message out there, because a lot of people, they turn on the TV and they look and they're like, hey, this isn't cool. Maybe this isn't for me. I think before, we've had definitely a wave with Gary Vee. We talked about it the last 5 or 10 years where it's getting cooler, but still, when you look up a lot of these subjects, 401k, go on 401k on YouTube. A lot of that content is really bland. It's really dense. The content's there, it exists, but it's really dense. So that's why I love what you're doing. Like, you're making stuff really cool too, with the sets and the music and, making it entertaining. Right? Because if it's not entertaining, then people aren't going to pay attention.
Totally get that. Because again, I'm on a similar mission. Like, I want people to really just understand this stuff. Because if you put the power into their hands with knowledge that they can actually apply to their life, the world changes, right? You're only captive until you can afford to get out of the jail, right? Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's where we all are. You don't notice the fence around you. You can't escape unless you notice the fence around you. So I want to give that information away in a way that's consumable, that captures people's attention so that they can say, okay, I'm going to give this guy 60 seconds of my life. Maybe it's informational, but then they can click to the next thing and then the next thing. And I try to create the content that compounds on itself. One of the things, Tony, that I really like doing with my guests, I like taking us on almost like a thought exercise. Would you mind going down that path with me for a second?
You're not going to hypnotize me.
No. But I do want you to imagine for a moment that you have the ability to go back in time, okay? And you can visit with a younger version of you. And you're able to share one piece of wisdom with that younger version of you. Who would you be going back to? Like, what age, like what was circumstances like at that point in time, and what would that one piece of information be? What wisdom would you share?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably... I always say that I don't want to change my life because I'm happy at the man that I've become, right? And I do feel that all the trials and tribulations that I've been through, whether it was like growing up without a father in the household or getting in trouble with the law, right? Like all of those things shaped the man who I am today, right? Absolutely. Like when I went to jail, I read books, right? So when people are like, do you wish you didn't go to jail? I was like, no.
You read books that changed your life. I read books
that changed my life. So like, no, I just sat there and just read books. And when I came home, people were saying, oh my God, it's like you went to college. Yeah. Right. So I don't know if I would necessarily change anything, but if I had to give myself some advice and maybe go back, I would probably go back to, when I was in high school trying to figure these things out, and I probably would have tried to get myself out of my hometown earlier.
Okay.
I think I didn't really escape my hometown, I think, until like my mid-20s. I think the sooner that people can get out of their hometown, you have all these friends who are really not your friends. So the advice that I had for my younger self is like, those people, whoever those people are, they're not your friends. Right? I've literally had friends that I was in kindergarten and grade school with literally stab me in the back.
Oh my goodness.
Not figuratively.
Yeah,
like
literally
with a knife trying to stab me in the back. Thankfully he missed, but he stabbed my jacket. But so I would go back and probably tell myself right before I got into high school, like, hey, those friends that you think are your friends, those are not your friends. Like there's no one else to impress. Right. I think when we're young, adolescents, especially boys, right? Like young men, we feel like we have to impress, we have to have something to prove and X, Y, and Z. And really the only person that you have to prove anything to is the man in the mirror.
Absolutely. Wow. I love that. But there's a second part to this thought exercise. Okay. I want you to imagine for a moment that a future version of Tony has come back into this moment with us, and he's sharing a piece of practical wisdom with you. What does he share?
So, I mean, I've just had a son recently, so I think a future version of me is probably going to tell me to make sure that I continue to prioritize my family and not get work in the way. As entrepreneurs, we're always working. Yeah. And, my son cries when we grab our phones. He hates it. It's like, as soon as you grab the phone, that's the attention. Right? Yeah. So I think, if a future self is going to, they say on your deathbed, you're probably not going to wish that you made more money. You're probably going to wish that you had more memories. So yeah, if the 99-year-old version of myself, he's probably going to say, wealth is good, but make sure you're also focused on your health and focused on the health of your relationships and your family.
So two versions of Tony have gotten some wisdom, right? The younger version and the current version. I don't want the audience to feel left out. So if you had one piece of practical wisdom to share with the audience, what would that be?
For the audience, I mean, don't be scared to invest into yourself. I remember demonizing money. We have this belief that money is evil. Right? They teach it to us in school. They say it in the church, on movies, TV, right? Money's evil. Money's the root of all evil, right? And one of the most useful mindset shifts for me has been the realization that money is a tool, right? And just like a hammer, you can use a hammer to hit people over the head. That's a bad way to use a hammer. Or you can use it to build a house. It's a great way to use a hammer. So money's a tool. Money's not evil. And money is actually a transfer of energy. And once I realized this, I actually learned this from like a yogi, not like a rich guy. He's like a spiritual dude. And he was telling me how like money is actually energy and value. And his belief is that it is impossible for you to pay for something and not receive value in exchange. Yes. It's like a value exchange. And so once you reframe it and you realize that money is this tool, money is an exchange of value and an exchange of energy, then you realize that the people with the most money are just simply the people providing the most value. Yes. And once you have that mindset shift, then you're not going to feel bad about making money because you're going to be like, wow, that means that's proof, that's evidence that I'm providing value to the world. So that's why I'm a big believer in capitalism, because capitalism is voting with your dollars, right? And those are the businesses that are going to succeed. So if there was one thing for your audience to just realize and embrace is that money is not evil. Money is actually a great tool that you can use to impact a lot of change. And, when I was trying to do philanthropic stuff, we needed money to do it. Oh, yeah. So the more money that you have, the bigger impact that you can have on people's lives. Wow.
Money's not the most important thing in the world, but it impacts everything that is.
Absolutely.
Tony, I've gotten a lot of value out of this conversation. I know that the audience has too. And if they wanted to get in touch with you, like after this episode, like what would be the best way for them to reach out to you, to find out more about your community and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So you can follow me on Instagram, Tony Delgado. You can also hit us up on Instagram, the company, Latino Wall Street, or Disrupt magazine.com, LatinoWallStreet.com. We're there. And we're hosting events all the time. We got an event coming up in Miami if you speak Spanish. So we'd love to see you there. And tune in.
Awesome. Tony, thank you so much for being here, being so authentic, and being willing to just share from your heart. Because I've learned a lot. I know you, and I learned a lot about you and your story. So I've gotten tremendous value out of this. I just want to sincerely thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Guys, this has been another episode of Entrepreneur Unleashed. I know 1,000% you've gotten huge value out of this man's story. What I'm going to implore you to do is don't put it to waste. Put it to use. Go out there, change your life for the better, because quite literally, you are the author, the director, and the main character in your story, and you have the ability to rewrite it if it's not going your way. I wish you well on your journey, guys. Edward Collins, signing off. Bye for now.